What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we are here to talk about an uncomfortable truth. That for as much as metal fans talk about how it's all about the music and it's not about the image, man, the truth is that rock and metal have always been full of bands that are in fact all about the image and the gimmick. Whether that's masks and costumes or just goofy lyrics, whatever, this stuff is everywhere. And some of those bands are great, and on the other hand, some of them are, well, let's just say not so great. So today, we will look at a handful of those gimmick bands and ask the question, were they actually a good band, or were they just about the gimmick? And also, I want to thank Allform for sponsoring this video. Allform is Helix/Birch's sister brand of sofas and chairs that are American made and easy to assemble. And now, more than ever, it's important to make the most of your time at home. For me, my wife and I both work from home, so we spend a lot of time in our house, which is why I was so excited to partner with Allform for this video. You can customize your sofa to your space and your style by creating over 500 unique combinations with seat numbers, corners, chases, and ottomans. They make it easy to find the perfect furniture for your space, your way, with a modular design. And based on our space, we chose the 3-seat sofa in black with a chase. And we just moved into this new house, so we wanted a sofa that fit our new living room. Something nicer than the cheap one we had before, and felt a little bit more modern and elevated. And you can put your Allform sofa together in as little as 15 minutes. Setup is super easy with completely tool-free assembly. And because Allform ships direct to consumer, they're able to use really premium materials, but still at a reasonable price. Shipping is fast and free, and if it makes you nervous to buy something that you haven't tried, no worries. Allform has a 100-day trial, so you get more than 3 months to make sure that you love it. And if you don't, they'll pick it up for you and give you a full refund. Just visit the link below or go to allform.com/punkrock for 20% off the sofa of your choice. And first up, let's talk about Steel Panther. If you're not familiar, these guys are kind of a self-parody of all the ridiculous hair metal bands of the 80s like Poison and Warrant and Motley Crue, all that kind of stuff. With the big hair and the spandex and the makeup and all that. They really just take all of that and turn it up to 11. For example, like they have songs called like Death to All But Metal, It Won't Suck Itself, and maybe my personal favorite, Fucking My Heart in the Ass. And what's interesting to me is how long this band has actually been around in one way or another. They officially started in 2008, but the members have been around in the scene forever. Their guitarist Russ was in a band called Fight with Rob Halford from Judas Priest, whose album is actually very good. Check it out if you haven't. The singer was in a version of LA Guns and randomly did background vocals on 2 AFI albums. I'm not sure what that's all about. And the band's first drummer was Ray Luzier of Korn. And so it's kind of interesting. On the one hand, they're obviously a joke or like a parody band with deliberately stupid lyrics and imagery. Their videos are hilarious, really just a parody of all those hair metal tropes. But then on the other hand, these guys are clearly very seasoned musicians who've been playing at a high level for a very long time. And the band is actually pretty damn good on just like a purely musical basis. If you just sort of take out the goofy lyrics, they're actually better than probably 90% of the actual like non-ironic hair metal bands of the 80s. And the videos are all super well done, just like an incredibly good parody of all the cliches of that era. So what is the verdict on Steel Panther? Well, I would really call them, they're not so much like a band as they are almost like musical entertainment. They're almost like the metal version of Disney on Ice or something like that. Meaning that they're clearly not trying to make like serious art or whatever. They're really just here to show people a good time, and I think they do a very good job of that. Now, personally, I wouldn't listen to them purely for the music because I don't think it quite holds up without the gimmick, but I do think you got to give them credit for doing it as well as they do. And next up, we have one of the most controversial, hated bands in metal, Ghost. Can you hear the rumble? These guys are from Sweden, kind of have a background in the death metal scene in the 90s there, in other bands. But Ghost came out in 2010 and really just like immediately made a splash. Their first album, Opus Eponymous, was a huge hit with the blogs and tastemaker hipster kind of metal media outlets like Decibel and Revolver, and everybody was talking about like, who are these guys? Like, where did they come from? why is this band so good? And I totally get why, because even as somebody who comes from like a punk and hardcore kind of background, so I've really never been into the masks and theatrical stuff in general, I gotta say, these guys did have an extremely cool image. The frontman was this like satanic pope kind of character who went by the name Papa Emeritus, and they had just this really cool vibe around them in terms of like the overall creative direction of this like occult sort of thing. They kind of reminded me of the 80s satanic panic sort of era when you would see all these news articles about heavy metal corrupting the youth and stuff. Really like took me back to that era in a way that felt like fun, but not really a parody. Very, very well done. And also they just had this general air of mystery around them because at the time their identities were secret. And they continued to evolve the band's lore with a different story behind every era of the band, with the Papa Emeritus character retiring and being replaced by someone new named Cardinal Copia, who was the same guy in a different costume. And everyone sort of knew that, but still it was fun to play along, right? And from the beginning, a lot of people tried to write them off as a gimmick band that nobody would care about without the masks and the mystery and the secret identities and all that. But that idea was proven false a few years ago when all the identities and inner workings of the band, as far as Papa Emeritus being like really the only member of the band and everyone else was a session musician, a hired gun, all that was revealed as part of a lawsuit between him and some of those hired guns. But that did not destroy the band. In fact, it was just the opposite. The band is actually more popular than ever, with their most recent album going to number 2 on Billboard in America. So what is the verdict on Ghost? Well, I don't personally listen to them, but I would say they're a pretty damn good band. And I think just like with Slipknot, the masks and the lore and the secret identities and all that stuff definitely helped them become bigger than they would have been without the gimmick. But I don't think it's at all fair to write them off as just a gimmick or novelty band. And next up, we have the one and only Gwar. I first heard this band back in 1991, I think, when someone gave me a cassette copy of their second album, Scumdogs of the Universe, and told me, like, you might like this. This band's a little bit too crazy for me. They're metal, but they have all these, like, crazy costumes. They're supposed to be aliens who landed on Earth, and they have this base in Antarctica, and the singer has this, like, giant foam dick. Based on that, I had no idea what to expect, right? But I put it in, I pressed play, and actually, it turns out that they're a pretty damn good thrash metal punk kind of hybrid band. And aside from the obviously ridiculous dumb shit like the giant foam rubber dick, turns out they're actually really clever. Like the beginning of the first song in the album, The Solomonizer, is a reference to the song Gangsta Gangsta by NWA, which was very, very advanced stuff for a metal band to do in 1991. And then somehow or another, I found out that they actually designed and built all those costumes themselves out of foam rubber and latex and, you know, kind of this like DIY visual effects sort of thing, like you might find in a low budget horror movie. And I found out about their live show where they would squirt blood and all kinds of other fake bodily fluids all over the audience, and that they directed their own videos. And really, I started to see it almost more like a collective art project than just a band, which I think is how they see it too. And of course, we can't forget their legendary appearance on Jerry Springer for his shock rock segment with the Mentors. Now the question is, does the band hold up aside from the gimmick? Well, as much as I actually admire and respect them for their creativity and the level of craft that they put into all the visual stuff, I would have to say probably not, although the band definitely doesn't suck on a musical level. Still, I think they are kind of inherently a gimmick band, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, just is what it is. And rest in peace to Dave Brockie. It is very cool to see the band have the kind of lasting impact and legacy that they've had. And next up we have Tenacious D, who I'm sure most of you probably know as the actor Jack Black's band, along with his friend and collaborator Kyle Gass. We are but men rock. And they're a little bit different than most of the other bands that I've talked about so far in that they don't really have like a visual gimmick. In fact, it's almost the opposite, right? They're just these like normal schlubby kind of dudes up on stage with acoustic guitars. Like it's almost like that is their gimmick. But really, I think their gimmick is their lyrics, which are kind of like the ultimate version of what grown-up theater kids who watched too much Monty Python would do. If you said, hey, you could just go out there and make the zaniest music you want, they would make Tenacious D, which kind of makes sense given that both of them did come up as comedy actors. And their big breakthrough came when David Cross and Bob Odenkirk, better known as Saul Goodman these days, but back then they were most known for being on Mr. Show. They discovered Tenacious D, got them on HBO, and that was really the band's big breakthrough. And does Tenacious D hold up? Well, I personally would say no. It's kind of funny, I guess, if you're into that sort of humor, and obviously Jack Black is incredibly charismatic and hilarious, but would anybody listen to this without the goofy lyrics? Probably not. And next up we have Okilly Dokilly, which is a metal band with a very simple concept. What if everybody in the band was Ned Flanders from The Simpsons? And honestly, there's really not much more to say about them than that. Other than that gimmick, their music is like pretty competent but basic post-hardcore / metal kind of stuff. The kind of stuff where if you've been playing music for a couple years, you and your friends could probably write a whole EP of this stuff in a weekend. It's not bad, but it's certainly not great either. On the other hand, I guess I have to give them some credit for milking the joke as long as they have, because they've been around for years. They're actually on tour right now. But overall, yeah, I would say that Okilly Dokilly definitely does not hold up. And next up, we have Dethklok. And for those who aren't familiar, Dethklok is the fictional band from the Adult Swim show Metalocalypse. The premise of the show is that this death metal band has somehow become massively successful, eventually becoming the 7th largest economy on Earth. And the whole show is about, sort of their various antics and adventures from their big castle that they paid for with the billions of dollars that they made from playing death metal. And although the show is a comedy and in many ways parodies metal culture, like the band's awful, brutal name and just in general sort of caricature of these like brutal death metal dudes, clearly at the same time, the parody is based on a genuine love of metal. And part of the reason why the show was so popular with metal fans is because the band is actually pretty legit. And the reason for that is that the show's creator, Brendan Small, is actually a very good musician who's been into metal forever. He went to Berkeley, the famous music college. I worked with him on a songwriting course a couple years ago, and I can personally confirm that he is the real deal. He's a super talented dude. And although the band is a fake band for the show, they actually did take it on tour. I saw them with Suicide Silence, I think, and they sounded great. They got Gene Hoglan as their drummer. He's one of the best metal drummers of all time. And if you listen to Dethklok next to maybe like old Amon Amarth, it actually doesn't sound very different. So does Dethklok hold up aside from their gimmick? I would say actually they do. They're legitimately a good death metal band. And next up, a band that many people have asked me to talk about, Sleep Token. She's an undiscovered element, either born in hell or heaven sent. Either way, I'm into it. And they're another one of these anonymous, masked metal bands, almost maybe like the prog version of Ghost. And their lore is that they're part of this cult dedicated to worshiping an ancient god named Sleep. And their singer is named Vessel because he's the one that this god has chosen to speak through or whatever. And they're not the biggest band in the world by any means, but their fans absolutely love them. Like, people would take a bullet for this band. And I think all the imagery and lore is a big part of that, because their fans are the kind of, somewhat nerdy people who really enjoy geeking out on lore and whatnot, whether that's in comic books or TV shows or whatever. So for them, having all that like lore and imagery to sink their teeth into, I think makes the band more than just music to them and almost like part of this whole world that they get to be part of. But with that said, I actually don't think it's fair to call them a gimmick band. I think it's kind of the same case as with Ghost or Slipknot, where the imagery and lore certainly helps, but the band is legitimately just good on a purely musical basis, and they would definitely be successful without the gimmick. The gimmick stuff just really adds to the appeal and enhances what's already there. And next up we have Alestorm, which, as you might guess from the name, is a pirate metal band from Scotland. And again, there's kind of really not a lot more to say about them than that. It's really just kind of pretty basic folk metal / power metal, except all the songs are about being a pirate and drinking, and they dress like pirates in the videos, except pirates with a keytar. That's maybe the most notable thing about them, aside from the pirate thing. And I gotta say, this stuff is so European and so dorky that it's pretty hard for me to be objective about it as someone that's just like fundamentally not into like nerdy, dorky stuff. To me personally, this stuff is just absolutely awful. I would never in a million years choose to listen to this. And it just like makes me uncomfortable with how dorky it is. But honestly, you know, if I listen to it compared to the other folk metal bands that are always on those like big European summer festival lineups, it kind of fits in. Again, it's kind of hard for me to be objective because this just really isn't my scene, but it's certainly no worse than the band who did that Minecraft metal song, for whatever that is worth. So what is the verdict? Well, I feel like power metal and folk metal are sort of like inherently gimmicky genres. So I guess by those standards, I guess it kind of holds up. I don't know. You guys tell me. And next up, we have a band that I'm a little bit scared to talk about because their fans are, well, let's just say very intense, but that band is Babymetal. And Babymetal's gimmick is pretty clear, right? They're Japanese girls in cute outfits playing metal. They call it kawaii metal, or cute metal. And they actually have a pretty interesting backstory. They are what's known as an idol group. Essentially kind of the same thing as NSYNC or Backstreet Boys, where there's some industry person who puts together this group and recruits performers based on their image and attractiveness and just potential to be an idol. So imagine NSYNC, but it's girls and they play metal. Same kind of idea. Babymetal in particular was created by an agency called Amuse, who has put together tons of these idol groups. And before joining the band, none of the girls actually knew or cared about metal at all. They were just training to be pop artists, and all the metal stuff comes from their producer, who goes by the name Koba Metal. So as much as I think the fans of the band sort of don't want to admit this, the girls are just performers the same as Britney Spears or One Direction were. I'm hesitant to call people industry plants, but if there's ever a time where that applies, it would be here. But all of that being said, I actually do think their music is very well done. Whoever writes this stuff is very, very competent. Everyone in the band is fantastic, and the girls themselves are really good singers and performers. So I can't take anything away from them there. And so in that sense, I suppose it kind of holds up aside from the gimmick, but at least when it comes to their American fan base, you kind of have to ask the question of like, how many of them would listen to Babymetal if it wasn't played by Japanese girls in these cute matching outfits, right? The answer is probably not many. The weeaboo factor is real. And last but not least, the one and only Mac Sabbath, whose concept is, what if Ronald McDonald sang for Black Sabbath? This band is almost like too weird to believe. Like, all their songs are Black Sabbath covers, but with the lyrics changed to be a McDonald's theme, like sweet beef instead of sweet leaf, and more ribs instead of war pigs. Their big breakthrough came back in 2014 when they went kind of semi-viral with their song Frying Pan, which was a cover of Iron Man. And as much as I generally kind of hate joke bands, I kind of had to respect this one just because of how fucking weird it is. This is like something my friends and I would have come up with in high school when we were staying up way too late one night watching Headbangers Ball or something, except that they actually made costumes and legit music videos for it. And they eventually even went on a headlining tour of America and actually got really good reviews for their shows. Everyone's like, actually, this McDonald's Black Sabbath band is kind of good. So is Mac Sabbath great music? Does it hold up aside from the gimmick? I mean, I don't know if I could say that exactly. It kind of just is what it is. But I do have to respect their dedication to this. And so for that alone, I will give it a passing grade. All right, my friends, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Check me out on Twitch. If you haven't, I'm streaming twice a week from 4 to 7 p.m. Pacific on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There's a link to that in the description of this video. And as always, I want to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get my podcasts early. I do giveaways. I do Q&As. There's also a way to have me review your music if that is something you're interested in. Every month, I do a call for submissions. If you want me to check your music out, all you got to do is drop it in the comments of that post. Then I will review it live on Twitch and post it on Patreon for everyone to see. So if that sounds cool to you and you want to check out my Patreon, there's a link to that in the description of this video. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.